Hello, it's Martin, and yes, we are already in February of 2025, but there is still a lot of exciting cars about to come out in the rest of the year, so I thought I would put together a video of what I'm looking forward to most. And this includes brands from all across the spectrum, and the same goes for price points ranging from low-end budget cars all the way to the highest-end luxury vehicles. And that's the example I want to start with, the NIO ET9. It's a very interesting vehicle because it showcases the best of NIO. If you've never heard of NIO, they are one of these new Chinese brands which have popped out of nowhere, and they've been doing a really good job engineering proper high-end vehicles. They are trying to tackle BMW, Mercedes, Audi head-on. But if you look at the interior, it should become very apparent that the ET9 pushes that level even further, because now NIO is saying that they are trying to take on the likes of Maybach and Rolls-Royce. Personally, I really love the styling where there is a good balance of luxury without going over the top and still striking that modern minimalist aesthetic. The overall cockpit layout follows what we know from the industry at this point. A big touchscreen in the middle, which is now horizontal instead of portrait like previous NIO products, and I believe this change will trickle down the rest of the NIO lineup. And for the ET9 specifically, there's also a thin horizontal display spanning the width of the entire dashboard. The steering wheel is not a wheel, it's a steering square. And that's because this vehicle does include steer-by-wire, so you can actually get away without a round steering wheel, without a compromise on functionality, etc, etc. I could just go on. What's important for a product of this class are the rear seats, especially if you are trying to make this a chauffeur-driven vehicle like most Rolls-Royces and Maybachs are. And it appears like NIO really did their homework here, because the cabin is just gorgeous. That minimalism from the front carries over into the back, but you have got a nice split panoramic glass roof, personal entertainment system, lots of ambient lighting, reclining individual chairs in the back with, I would assume, massaging, heating, ventilation functions, an onboard fridge, a pop-out tray table, everything you would expect in a high-end executive vehicle. But in case you do not have a chauffeur but still want to be driven around, just like most of these high-end cars, it comes with a whole suite of driving assistance systems, and in case of the NIO, the latest generation of their components, featuring lots of cameras all around the vehicle, 3 LiDARs in the front, multiple 4D millimeter wave radars, which in other words are high definition radars. And this is not just marketing speak, there is actually an improvement to these radars over traditional radars which we saw in vehicles up until this point. And yeah, it's all just packaged into this ultra luxurious high-end vehicle, which you could say has the silhouette of an inflated Porsche Panamera, maybe a Jaguar I-Pace, something in between. It really is designed from the ground up to give maximum cabin space to the occupants in the back, and also fantastic ride comfort without too much of a compromise on handling and stability. So it's in between an SUV and a normal limousine. I just want to briefly touch on some of the specifications. The overall power and acceleration figures are not that impressive. It's in line with what we know from the EV world at the moment, but that's because that's not the focus of this car. The important bit is the platform. It's the NIO's third and latest generation platform, and we will get into why that is important in just a second, featuring a 100 kWh really high voltage battery at 900 volts nominal voltage, which is also capable of swapping. So in some countries, NIO is already building out battery swap stations. This is especially the case for China and Norway, where they're really trying to establish their presence, which means if you cannot stand charging your vehicle on a road trip, why would you do that with all the peasants if you're driving an ET9? Well, then you can just swap the battery in a matter of 3-4 minutes maximum, so the pit stop would be actually probably shorter than a refueling stop, and you can carry on going. Not that rapid charging should be much of an issue, because while we do not have the full charging curve and 10 to 80% charging time yet, this 100 kWh pack will peak at 600 kilowatts of charging power, so expect the 10 to 80% time somewhere in the 15 to 20 minute region at most. One very important disclaimer I want to make when looking at the ranges of these Chinese vehicles: they are usually tested on the CLTC cycle, which is the most lenient cycle of them all. So EPA in the US is probably the strictest and most realistic, especially for highway cruising. Then you have got WLTP, which we use in Europe, and that is a little bit more lenient, and CLTC is even more lenient than WLTP. So those 400 miles of range will in reality be probably about 250 at 70-80 miles per hour. But don't let it distract you from the fact that this vehicle is really focused on showcasing the latest and greatest technology NIO has on offer. If you can't quite place it onto the market based on the images you have seen, well, let's look at the dimensions. It's over 5.3 meters long with a massive 3.2 meter wheelbase, but considering the overall size of it, the weight still comes round to just under 2.5 tons. I've seen different weight figures. The ET9 has just been announced and the order books have opened, so I'm sure there will be more detail shortly, but I think considering the size of the vehicle, this is not too bad. Let me know in the comments what you think about it, but you may be wondering, why is this car even of relevance? Well, a couple of points I need to mention. These are just the cars which I think are exciting for the industry overall. I'm not necessarily saying these are ranked from 1 to 20, and I'm not saying these are the cars which will necessarily reach Europe, and definitely not the US in the next year, maybe even 2 years. But it does set the standard, and importantly, NIO is trying to make a big splash in Europe with their new sub-brand Onvo, which is like a budget sub-brand. Think of VW versus Škoda. Onvo being aimed at much larger sale volumes. And they're trying to make an entry with the L60, coming directly head-on for the Tesla Model Y. It has a very similar, slightly raised up SUV stance, but a coupe-like roofline for better aerodynamics, in exchange better range, whilst maintaining good passenger space in the cabin. And the interior feels very similar to the Tesla Model Y as well. Important to mention here that Tesla has just released the refreshed Tesla Model Y, but even then, this is similar, and it feels like Onvo/NIO have researched what people like about the Model Y, copied it over, but all the criticisms which people didn't like about the Model Y have been addressed. So just like with the ET9, you see that there is a very familiar layout of the cabin. There's a small screen for the passengers in the back and a big horizontal touchscreen in the front. However, if we zoom in on that cockpit, you will see that there are still some physical controls on the steering wheel, using very similar scroll wheels to the Teslas. You have a mostly round steering wheel. There are some stalks behind the wheel, so you still have normal indicators and a normal drive selector. And for people who absolutely cannot stand the one-screen solution and do want the speed in front of them when they are driving, there's also an integrated heads-up display. As for the styling, there's just a little bit more going on. Whether this is good or bad, I will let you decide, but there is a wooden texture and multiple layers, almost creating this cascading waterfall effect on the dashboard, and I'm sure there will be plenty of ambient lighting to make it look all fancy at night. Heated and ventilated seats in the front, the whole shebang, and there's also this slightly gimmicky feature that you can fully recline them into a flat position if you take the headrests out, and then you essentially can sleep in the vehicle in the front seats and stretching all the way to the rear bench. How many people will use that? I don't know. At least not in the UK, but hey, it's these young companies trying to differentiate themselves from what's on the market. Specifications wise, there are multiple versions, and in China at least it seems like you will be able to mix and match whether you want all-wheel drive and which size battery, but just for the sake of comparison I've lifted the cheapest model, which will be the small battery single motor rear-wheel drive version, and the full-featured long-range all-wheel drive on the other end of the spectrum. Important to note here that just like that super high-end ET9, this is built on the same platform. So while it doesn't have the same level of luxury and interior materials, it will have the same underlying technology and drivetrain, which means a high voltage battery, a properly high voltage battery in the 700 to 800 volt range with very fast recharging times, much better than what we get at least here in Europe with the LG battery packs in the Tesla Model Y. And size-wise, it really will be a nice alternative to the Model Y with potentially an even slightly longer wheelbase for a bit more legroom in the second row. Not that that would be much of an issue with the current Model Y. So yeah, especially with the Tesla brand currently being on a little bit of a thin ice because of what's happening with Elon and politics, this could actually become a very safe choice for many Europeans. And this is actually launching in 2025. I don't know for other markets, but I believe the launch in the UK is scheduled for the first half of 2025, and there have been already sightings of some marketing agencies doing some filming and photo shoots in central London of these cars, so the launch is absolutely imminent. But let's move back to Europe if you do not want a Chinese electric vehicle with the BMW iX3. BMW has been talking about the Neue Klasse platform for a while now, but it's actually launching this year. I absolutely love these minimalist interiors. To a certain extent it feels like a throwback to the i3, just modernized for 2025, but you may be a little bit confused because BMW announced multiple concepts based on the Neue Klasse architecture, and the one which looks like the successor to the 3 Series Saloon has been actually announced first, with the Vision D being the first one with wacky projectors and color-changing body panels, then followed by the Vision Neue Klasse, with a very similar interior to what I've shown you for the iX3. It looks pretty much identical, just with slightly changed colors for the upholstery to differentiate them. So what's actually happening, and why am I talking about concepts? Well, BMW does concepts a little bit differently, and especially when they are not changing anything else other than the color of the upholstery and slightly tweaking the details, that's how you know that they are close to production. And we have seen this in the history with the brand. Let me remind you of the i3. When that first concept was announced, everybody thought, yes, it's this hyper-futuristic urban vehicle which will never make it to production, with windows like that and doors which open backwards, a very roomy interior with a super minimalist dash, and a design language which doesn't match with the rest of the lineup. But then BMW had the i3 Concept Coupe, which was a follow-up concept to the initial i3 concept, and that's how you could tell that they were getting serious, because we were getting closer to production. Some of those super futuristic touches have been dropped in favor of more production-ready materials, but the design ethos has stayed the same. And if you then move to the actual production version, well, compared to the previous concept, again, they've given it production-ready headlights and tweaked some of the interior bits to comply with crash safety regulations, but that's it. It stayed very, very similar and true to the previous versions. So it's almost like BMW is iterating with this concept, bringing us closer to the final production version. So I'm absolutely confident that what you see with the Neue Klasse X concept will be the iX3. Think possibly slightly different lights and maybe slightly dulled down creases, again to comply with all of those safety regulations, but that's it. This is what we are getting as a successor for a mid-size electric SUV. I believe it is going to be announced in the second half of 2025, but we already know some underlying bits of technology about this brand new platform, as BMW have been teasing it for so long. Firstly, finally, we are switching from prismatic cells to cylindrical cells. I could make a whole dedicated video on battery cells and chemistry, but the point is that the current BMWs, especially the higher end ones which you would want to take on a longer trip, can sometimes overheat if you rapid charge them in quick succession many times over the span of, let's say, 12-24 hours. And it's that battery cell format which is the limiting factor. So by going to cylindrical cells, it just proves that Tesla was right all along. Together with chemistry improvements, it should hopefully improve the thermal endurance, and you should no longer have to worry about overheating if you rapid charge too many times. Secondly is the new cockpit with the latest generation of the iDrive infotainment system, the iDrive 10 or iDrive X. I'm not sure how BMW wants us to pronounce that, but it features that big horizontal, slightly angled screen in the middle with a wide heads-up display type interface below the windscreen, which is supposedly going to be visible to all passengers. You will have a dedicated zone just for the driver with the immediate speed, state of charge, all the important bits like you would have in an instrument cluster. There is no longer a traditional instrument cluster, and the rest of the heads-up display will be customizable with different widgets like, for example, weather, estimated time of arrival at destination, compass, etc. Just like with current BMWs, a heads-up display which is actually projected into the transparent bit of the windscreen itself will be also present, just in a bigger, more augmented reality form. And that weird 2/4-spoke steering wheel, that is supposedly going into production. I'm quite keen to see what the buttons are like, because it seems like it will feature some touch capacitive buttons. Not all of those are made equal, and if you want to see how I got on with the touch capacitive buttons in my personal vehicle, the ID.3, make sure to check that out in the top right hand corner of this video, as I've made a dedicated episode on that. But this is one of those things which remains to be seen in practice. So overall, yes, very exciting times for BMW, and hopefully this platform really brings a massive step change into what their products offer, because currently they are good, but they're very average, whereas from a premium manufacturer you would really expect a lot, especially if they are charging premium money for them. And yeah, the timeline is that the SUV comes first in 2025 and it will be followed by a electric 3 Series saloon, possibly named the i3, in 2026. Keeping with the theme of German brands, Mercedes has not been doing the best with EVs either, especially on the compact end. Their EQE and EQS are expensive vehicles, but at least it feels like you get a lot for your money. They are very refined, long-range electric cars. But the EQA, EQB, I think are terribly engineered, compromised, not particularly well packaged, reliable, efficient. It's just a bit of nothing, but you pay a lot of money for them. But that's all changing with the upcoming Mercedes CLA. Again, it's a concept, but it's supposedly very close to production, so at least we can get a flavor of what's about to happen. On the exterior, gone is that blobby styling of other Mercedes EVs in favor of this slightly more sharp and angular design, which should hopefully resonate better with existing Mercedes customers. And on the interior, we should get a widescreen infotainment with a brand new Mercedes-Benz operating system. What's important is what lies underneath the skin, because while the previous compact Mercedes vehicles feels like we're thrown together from bits from suppliers just to say that, yes, we have an EV on the market. Now there's a lot more thought in this drivetrain. The batteries feature high voltage technology, very fast rapid charging. The default choice will be a single motor rear-wheel drive layout, and it will feature a 2-speed gearbox, a bit like the Porsche Taycan. And in fact, these compact, supposedly entry-level budget Mercedes cars, which still will not be budget, they will be probably somewhere in the £40,000 region starting, have beaten the Porsche Taycan in how many miles they were capable of covering in a period of 24 hours. That's super impressive because the Porsche Taycan is one of the best road tripping vehicles at the moment, featuring decent efficiency and super fast charging speeds. So if we can get that level of performance in a much cheaper vehicle, which will be affordable, not necessarily to the masses but to middle-class families, that's a huge win for electric mobility. And this new technology will form the underpinning for all compact Mercedes models going forward. So the CLA Saloon, a CLA shooting brake, a new compact SUV with a similar footprint to those vehicles, and possibly 1 or 2 more other vehicles. Mercedes will also take this opportunity to simplify their lineup, because currently it's an absolute mess. You've got the A-Class hatchback, CLA Saloon, CLA shooting brake, there is the B-Class, there is an EQB, EQA, and I probably lost some in the process. So hopefully you can expect a lineup which will be easier to navigate. And yes, CLA Saloon will be the vehicle which this platform will be launching in. And given Mercedes has now been doing prototype test drives for the press, that launch is very much imminent. So if you're in the market for an electric Mercedes, hold off, wait for these to be released to see what is happening and what the price points will be, and only then decide whether you want one of the last gen at a cheaper price on the used market, or whether you're happy to go for one of these brand new models. But let's be honest, Mercedes is not the only German brand which is in trouble. VW has not been having it easy lately either. I've been running the ID.3 as my personal vehicle and I really enjoyed it, but it doesn't seem to have hit the market numbers which VW would have been expecting. So there is a lot riding on this new car which is launching in 2025, the ID.2 All. That name is probably not final, but it's basically an electric version of the VW Polo, and it's marketed as an electric car for the masses with around a £25,000 price point. It will be built on a completely new platform called the MEB Entry, so I'm sure it will take some bits from the existing MEB platform, but it will be simplified to better fit into these compact, lower-end, more budget-oriented vehicles, with the biggest difference being that the motor now lives under the bonnet, powering the front wheels. Which in my eyes is a little bit of a shame for an EV, but VW is promising some fantastic packaging with good interior space and massive boot in return, so I suppose it could work for their core clientele. Even more importantly for the traditional VW customer, the brand has listened to feedback about touch controls, which again I didn't quite mind, but they are going back to a lot more physical hardware switches with a lot of nice interior materials, a bigger instrument cluster display, which I'm assuming will be able to show a full map, in addition to the directional arrows from the sat-nav system. There will be physical shortcuts for the most important air conditioning controls, like your heated seats and adjustment of the temperature, lots of ambient lighting, and so on. So this isn't just about the ID.2, but it's showing us how VW is able to adapt to the feedback they've received from their existing lineup and hopefully strengthen going forward, because let's be honest, if this does not succeed, I don't think there is much hope for VW going forward. An alternative to the ID.2 will be the Škoda Epiq, a compact crossover SUV built on the same brand new MEB entry platform, and the same technology from those other VW models will be carried over, but being a Škoda, I'm sure it will have lots of those nice little touches to make it a very easy to live with vehicle, and being a slightly raised up crossover SUV, it's the market which people really want. So if that's priced aggressively enough, it could be a big seller, following the success of the Enyaq and the Elroq. And yes, this new Epiq will be smallest of those trio of electric vehicles from Škoda. Staying in this budget region, but moving on to Tesla, which has been giving us a lot of mixed messages lately, especially because we have seen this image of Tesla's future lineup with some vehicles still to be unveiled, but then Elon comes out on stage and says that actually the robo-cab or the robo-taxi is going to replace what was meant to be the Tesla Model 2 as a budget little hatchback. However, I've lifted this slide directly from Tesla's shareholder notes because I wanted to get it right. Because if you read the first paragraph saying that there are plans for new vehicles including more affordable models which remain on track for start of production in the first half of 2025, that gives us a lot of clues to what's happening. Firstly, it's saying that it's not just on track to be unveiled, but they are on track to start production in 2025. I don't know how this is possible, because Tesla must have kept these vehicles under wraps. Normally, production starts when you have had validation prototypes on the roads for a while, and you've been able to gather engineering feedback to make sure that all bugs are ironed out. Especially when you're talking about vehicles built on brand new platforms with new technology as well. So we will see how that pans out. I'm sure we may also get a new Model 3 variants which are a bit lower end, like for example what Tesla is providing in Mexico, with a Model 3 with a lowest end trim which features cloth seats, some fewer interior details to cut down on costs. Or perhaps we'll just get a robotaxi with a steering wheel, because that model is meant to be very cheap to build for Tesla, and it could slot in nicely as a budget alternative to their other vehicles, but I'm not sure it would be very successful in Europe, because yes, that slippery aerodynamic shape lends itself well to the US, where a lot of the mileage is done at higher speeds and aerodynamics matter, but in Europe we care about car footprint and being able to squeeze lots of cargo and passengers into the smallest possible footprint to be nice and easy to live with in towns and cities. But let's leave Tesla behind and let's move on to Nissan, because let's be honest, there have been news of them struggling a lot lately. What is definitely on the schedule for 2025 is the new Nissan Leaf. So the old Leaf has been terribly outdated, still shipping with the CHAdeMO connector for rapid charging, and the only selling point for it was literally the price, which is not a good position to be in for a brand at all. However, the new Leaf should be heavily revised based on the concept you see on the screen, based on the same platform as the Ariya, just shrunken down and taking the form of a crossover SUV. As you could probably notice, that's the theme of this video. Manufacturers are trying to build cars which appeal to the masses, and for better or for worse, masses like these raised up hatchbacks with potentially slightly sloping rooflines for a more sporty look. So that's what the next Leaf will be. It's a very important vehicle for the brand, so let's see how that pans out, because if this goes wrong, I don't think there's much hope left for Nissan. Moving to South Korea, a brand which is doing very well with electric vehicles is Kia, and there is a lot to be excited for in this year. Firstly, we have seen the concept of the Kia EV4, and that's launching this year, and not just this year. Based on how quick I am with editing of this video, it should be literally within a week or two at most. It's about to drop, featuring a very similar design to the rest of Kia's electric lineup. And how do we know that this concept means anything? Well, it's the same as with BMWs. We can look into the history of Kia concepts. And if you put side by side the EV3 concept next to the EV3 production car, well, they are practically identical down to the slightly wacky wheel designs, the body shape, the colors, lights, etc. So expect this EV4 to look pretty much like the concept did. And on top of that, there are even now some official teaser shots from Kia of the production vehicle. And for example, if you look at the rear quarter panel, there are no surprises there. I want to note that there have been multiple rumors of the EV4, and yes, the Saloon will launch first as probably a competitor to the Tesla Model 3, so expect a price slightly higher than the EV3 and possibly a longer vehicle, but built using the same architecture and same technology as we have seen in the EV3. But there is also an EV4 hatchback coming out, and after the EV4 is announced, we should get an EV2 concept which will preview a super compact, budget-oriented vehicle to compete with the likes of the ID.2 and Škoda Epiq. On the completely opposite end of the scale, we have got the Lucid Gravity. And it's not necessarily a new car, we have known about this for a while, but it's a hugely important car to keep an eye out on, because while I don't think it's coming to Europe, at least not to the UK, being quite a large SUV, it also has a super modern interior, which has been improved based on the feedback of the first generation Lucid Air. The sales of this vehicle and how much profit Lucid makes will dictate whether they make it to their next generation of a car, which is supposedly a more compact, more affordable SUV to take on the very popular Tesla Model Y. And yes, I'm a huge fan of Lucid, because if you asked me what single company is doing the best electric cars in the market at the moment, technology-wise, there is no competing with Lucid. Their drivetrains are very compact, they have a fantastic understanding of electronics, a lot of it is done in-house, and they have a level of vertical integration which is only probably comparable to Tesla, in other words, the best of the best. And given we are speaking about high-end vehicles, we can't forget about Porsche. Porsche had massive electrification plans, but they have been toned down lately because the Taycan especially has not been selling as well as they would expect it to in the last couple of years. However, I believe we should still be getting the new Cayman or the Boxster or 718, whatever you want to call it, this year. I'm showing you a picture of the petrol version because while prototypes have been already spotted on the road, I don't have the right to use those images. But expect a vehicle which will very closely resemble the Mission R concept. However, this is more about just a vehicle. Yes, it will be challenging and interesting to see how Porsche manages to make a fun, hopefully lightweight, sporty electric car, because those are things which don't necessarily go together. But let's be honest, with the Taycan, Porsche proved that you can make an electric car which happens to be a Porsche with a lot of driving dynamics and character. Secondly, I think it will be almost like a test vehicle which dictates whether Porsche will continue on this full electric strategy or whether they will delay with their other models and possibly bring back some petrols and hybrids. It will be very complicated and probably very costly, given they have sunk a lot of money and research and development into these pure electric platforms which are not designed to accommodate combustion engines, but time will tell. This is why it's a very interesting vehicle to keep an eye out on. Especially because it will be followed by something which more people will want to buy, and that's an electric version of the Cayenne. But while the Boxster is still scheduled for 2025, despite some trouble with sourcing batteries, as they were meant to be produced by Northvolt, but as we all know, Northvolt went bust, and I believe Porsche didn't have a backup supplier. That should still be resolved in time for a 2025 launch, but the Cayenne is launching in possibly 2026, and then there will be another big extra luxurious SUV which will sit above the Cayenne, and that's coming probably 26, 27 or later, if at all now. Next up is a company which did try to compete with Porsche, but they have had a lot of mixed results. Their products are, I think, genuinely quite good. Maybe not quite Porsche worthy, but at least on par with BMW, Mercedes and Audi, the usual German premium competition. Of course, I'm talking about Polestar, and this year they are launching the 5, an ultra high-end premium saloon to rival with the likes of the Tesla Model S, the Porsche Panamera. Just like the Polestar 4, do not expect a rear window on this one, but do expect a very Scandinavian minimalist traditional Polestar interior, which we all know and love, especially in the highest end Polestar 3. If you have trouble keeping up with all of these Polestar models, they are named sequentially, but the numbers don't really mean anything in terms of where they slot in the lineup. And it's extra confusing because at the moment every Polestar is built on top of a different platform. You have to keep in mind when Polestar launched as a brand, it was a little bit of a rushed job because they came out of Volvo. So the Polestar 2 was in fact first meant to be a Volvo, it was just rebranded last minute to be a Polestar. The 3 shares the underpinnings with the electric XC90, the EX90 Volvo. And then we had the Polestar 4, which shared the underpinnings with the Zeekr 001 from China. So all a bit of a mishmash, but the Polestar 5 truly should be a ground-up Polestar. And prototypes have already been out, there are some official photos of them, they look exactly like the concept. And they've been tested with a new battery which wasn't that big in capacity, but could charge from 10 to 80% in 10 minutes. So if that makes it into the production version, or at the very least if we get a car which can charge to 80% in 12-15 minutes, it will absolutely set the benchmark for the segment, and it could sway some of those Taycan customers towards this new, more modern and fresh brand. But let's be honest, there are not that many Taycan customers to sway, so whether this saves Polestar or not, we will see. There's also talks of a new Polestar 7, which will be a yet again compact crossover SUV launching, but that's for another video, because even with accelerated development to save the brand, I don't think they have quite enough time to get it done in 25. On the Volvo front, there is the new ES90 coming out, which has been heavily teased. It's present on the Volvo website, so that's how you know that it is definitely coming out. It's going to be Volvo's flagship saloon. Basically, expect just a saloon version of the EX90 SUV. Focused on comfort and this understated elegance rather than sportiness, which it seems like all the other German competitors are going for. And speaking of comfort and luxury, we have to talk about the elephant in the room, the Jaguars. That has been that controversial marketing campaign which launched the rebrand and these brand new concept vehicles, but yes, they are concepts only. However, production versions have been spotted on the roads and they should very closely resemble the concepts, just take the form of 4-door saloons or GT vehicles rather than these 3-door Rolls-Royce Spectre looking things. I'm very interested to see what comes out of it, because Jaguar is saying that they are going much higher end with higher price points to match, but you can only charge a lot of money if the technology and the experience matches the expectations. I've heard a rumor, which is completely unconfirmed, that we may be getting Lucid drivetrains in these vehicles, and that could be a match made in heaven. Lucid is fantastic with the electronics and drivetrain components and integration, and they're getting very good efficiency to get very good range, while Jaguar really knows how to do beautiful interiors with attention to detail in the design elements. So it really could go really well, and it also could go terribly wrong, and it could completely tank the brand. So it's something to keep an eye out on. But yes, that production version of the 4-door vehicle is coming out in 2025. So the stakes are definitely high for Jaguar. And to wrap this up towards the end with something a bit more attainable, but at the same time hugely important, is a successor to the MG ZS EV. The ZS EV was very popular in the UK as a compact family everyday vehicle. It's already available in China as the ES5. We will probably get a rebranded version here in the UK. Importantly, it's a little bit bigger, offering more interior space, which families always appreciate, and it rides on the same platform as the MG4, so expect a much more sophisticated ride with a rear-wheel drive layout to go with it as well. The other change is the interior. It's not even close to the existing MG4. It has gone much higher end, upmarket, without supposedly a big increase in cost. At least we can keep our fingers crossed for that. Featuring a new infotainment as well. Software has been one of the criticisms of the existing MG lineup, but this looks to be completely redone from the ground up, having a new, bigger infotainment system screen, lots more colorful widgets, more modern icons. The only thing which seems to be shared with the cabin of the MG4 is the steering wheel. So as I said, if this is priced right, I think you can expect to see lots of these on the UK roads. And I think that's a good point to conclude on. Let me know what you think about these cars, which one is your favorite, which ones I missed, and which ones you are looking forward to. If you appreciate the summary, make sure to hit the like button. And other than that, thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Make sure to subscribe for more EV content.